Good morning, children. Today, in Social Science and History in Class 9, we continue the lesson Forest Society and Colonialism. Now, we have seen how scientific forestry was introduced in our country, and that was that the natural forests, which had lots of different types of trees, were cut down, and in their place there was one type of tree that was planted in straight rows, which came to be called as plantation. So we see that how these forest officials surveyed the forest and estimated area under different types of trees and made plans for forest management. They made a plan how much plantation area to be cut every year, and then to be replanted also, so that it would be ready to cut again in some years. Now, after the Forest Act that was enacted in 1865, there were two amendments. One amendment was in 1878 and the second one was in 1927. According to the 1878 Act, that divided forests into three categories, and these three categories were reserved forest, protected forest and village forest. And what is the difference? The best forests were called as reserved forests, and here people could not take anything from these forests, not even for their own use. So this is how the reserved forests came to be reserved and not permitted for the villagers to use. For building houses or fuel, they could take wood from protected or village forests, so that they were allowed. So this classification, the three categories of forests came to be formed. But it affected the people in many ways, because till now they had the liberty to allow their cattle to graze over there and use all the resources that they found in the forest, on the basis of which they had survived. But now there were changes. Now we'll see what is the effect of forest rules on cultivation. One of the major impacts of European colonialism was on the practice of shifting cultivation, or swidden agriculture, which is a traditional agricultural practice in many parts of Asia, Africa and South America. Now, what is this shifting cultivation? That is, when parts of the forest are cut and burnt in rotation, and then seeds are sown in the ashes after the first monsoon rains. So, after they cut and burn in rotation, seeds are sown, and then after the first monsoon rain, the crop is harvested by the month of October or November. And then such plots are cultivated for a couple of years and then left fallow. That means they plow it, but they don't grow any crop over there for about 12 to 18 years for the forest to grow back. And mixture of crops is grown on these lands, that is like millet, maize, beans in Latin America. So this was what was called as the shifting cultivation or swidden agriculture. Now it had various local names in different countries. For instance, in Southeast Asia it was known as lading, then milpa in Central America, chitmene or tavi in Africa, and chenna in Sri Lanka. In India also it is known by different local names like Dhyai, Penda, Bewar, Nevad, Jhum, Podu and Kumri. So this was the practice, this was the traditional agricultural practice followed in many parts of the world, in many countries. Now, the perspective of the Europeans regarding this practice of shifting cultivation was different. So the European foresters regarded this practice as harmful for the forest. Why did they consider it harmful for the forest? Because they felt that land which is used for cultivation every few years, they could not grow trees for railway timber. So this was one perspective that they had about the forest, about this shifting cultivation, that where crops are grown, where the land is cultivated every few years, over there the trees could not grow for the railway timber. So that was one point of view of the Europeans. Then the second one was that when a forest was burned, there is a danger of spread of fire. So this danger of spreading flames and damaging valuable timber was always there. So this is what they felt about this, that the burning of the forest was that it is going to probably damage the valuable timber trees also that they were growing and which they needed for their own trade purposes. Then another perspective was that the shifting cultivation was non-profitable. How was it non-profitable? Because it was difficult for them to calculate taxes. How would they get the taxes? How would they get the revenue from the people when people are going to follow this practice? So this was another major difficulty that they experienced. So when all these things, the perspective of the European foresters was this, that they could not grow trees for railway timber if it was going to be used for cultivation. Then if the forest was burned, there was probably a chance or likelihood of the timber trees also to be damaged. And then it was considered to be non-profitable because the difficulty in calculation of the taxes. So how would they get the taxes from the people? So to solve all this problem, the government banned this practice, that is of shifting cultivation and setting fire to part of the forest. So with the result, communities were displaced from homes. That means that they were turned out. They lost their homes. And as a consequence, there were various people who were compelled to change their occupations. In some ways, people benefited also, but people had to change their occupation because now they did not have the access to the forest products. And there were some people also who had rebelled against this system. So there were rebellions in certain places. So that is the effect of the forest rules on the cultivation. Then another major impact that we see is the prohibition on hunting after the Forest Act of 1865. Now, that is that till now the people used to live by hunting also, by hunting partridges and small animals, deer and all. But now this was banned. So, this prohibition on hunting after the Forest Act of 1865. New forest laws were changed the lives of forest dwellers, the people who lived in the forest and the people who lived in the villages near the forest. Before the forest laws, people had survived by hunting and using all the resources that they found in the forest, but now they were not allowed to do that. So this was prohibited, that is their hunting, that the hunting that they used to do of deer, of partridges, other small animals, they were not allowed to do that now. In fact, it was prohibited, it was banned. And if they were caught doing this or hunting, they were severely punished. So obviously there was a lot of restriction on the movement of the people and their activities also, which affected them in so many ways. How it impacted, that is, it deprived people of the right to hunt. That is, now they were earlier they were freely able to go wherever they want to in whichever forest and hunt. Now they were not able to do that. In fact, it became a sport for the British. For centuries, hunting of tigers and other animals had been a part of the culture of the court and nobility for pleasure, for their enjoyment. It used to be, you can say, a sport for the people, for the rulers, and it used to be a part of their culture, and it was done for the purpose of pleasure, that their enjoyment. An example we can see in the Mughal paintings, where tigers and other animals used to be hunted and killed. Under the colonial rule, the scale of hunting increased to such an extent that various species almost became extinct. That is naturally. So under this colonial rule, what happened was that the hunting increased tremendously, and as a result, it also created a danger and a threat to some of the species which had almost become extinct. So because of the large scale hunting by these colonial rulers. and officials. So the British perspective was, now why did they do that? They felt that the large animals as a sign of wild, primitive and savage society. So they felt that this is what they felt about the society, that the wild and primitive and savage society. So they would civilize India by killing these animals. So they felt that by killing these animals, they would civilize our country, that is India. They also gave rewards to people for killing tigers, wolves and other animals. So they encouraged people, promoted people to hunt more of these animals, which was their way of conveying that they would civilize our country. And they also felt that they were a threat to the cultivators, that these animals, that they were a threat to the cultivators, so it was good that they could be killed. So that is how they began to encourage large scale killing of these animals, and in fact they gave rewards also. If we see the period from 1875 to 1925, we see that about over 80,000 tigers, 1,50,000 leopards and 2 lakh were killed for reward in the period between 1875 and 1925. So large scale killing of tigers, leopards and bulls took place, and they were rewarded also. So that is why such large number of animals came to be killed, which was very unfortunate for us. So initially certain areas were reserved for hunting, but later on there were people, the environmentalists and the conservators, who protested against hunting, because that way many of the species of these animals would become extinct, and they opined that these species of animals needed to be protected and not killed. So they protested against this large scale hunting of these animals in order to protect them and conserve. Thank you.